Thank you, Madam President, Prime Minister. With this said, it's time for the first panel. I kindly invite Tim King, editor of European Voice, to come and moderate, and distinguished panelist of the first panel also to join our moderator. Thank you. Tim, the mic is
yours. I'm hoping that I have my own mic strapped around my head. Could I invite... After those kind words to the Secretary General of the OECD, he's disappeared.
No,
you're there.
He's here.
You're there. I thought you were still negotiating
not
the
yet.
country report. Good. You're the missing link. Hello. My name is Tim King. I'm editor of European Voice. I'm a newspaper journalist, therefore I don't normally stand up. I shall try and cope nevertheless. I should also greet people outside this room. This session is being streamed live. There is also, we hope, to encourage a Twitter conversation, and the tag, for those of you both inside the room and outside the room, is at @LATO_LV. You'll find that in the first, on the inside cover of the guide, which those of you here should have received. I'm drawing your attention to the guide partly because I'm going to opt out of one of my tasks. One of my tasks is to explain to you who the speakers are. I take the view that those of you inside the room can read, and those of you outside the room will find much more interesting details about our speakers on the internet than has been put respectfully into this guide. So that's the choice. Could I ask those of you who have mobile phones inside the room to at least put them on mute mode? And then we will proceed. I will sort of introduce our speakers. I mean, at a sort of quick glance, you can see that you have before you Angel Gurría, the Secretary General of the OECD. You have, I've brought along, in case he'd forgotten it, a full-page profile of Andris from European Voice on the 9th of September 2010. I regret to inform you, Mr. Piebalgs, that your profile was as long ago as the 17th of February 2005. So I don't know what that.
That dates you.
I thought we were rather slow getting to it. That was 7 years into your time, and Professor Paquet is he's, as I understand it, a native of Saarbrücken. So he's over the bridge from Strasbourg, but now in Magdeburg. In Saxony-Anhalt. Having given that little detail, I just point out that I think I'm right in saying that you don't actually, no one on the panel is in elected government power. Is that fair to say? On the other hand, all of the panel has at some point been in elected government power. That's to say, Mr. Gurría was a Minister of Finance in Mexico. Mr. Cubillos was Prime Minister twice. Mr. Piebalgs, if we go, we can debate whether or not being a European Commissioner, to what extent you have a democratic mandate. But by the time we finish that debate, you will be out of office, and the new Commission will be in. But at least we don't dispute that at some point you were Minister for Education in Latvia, and Mr. Paquet was a Minister for Finance in Saxony-Anhalt, as a sort of, was that some kind of mad interlude from academic life? We'll find out. I conclude from that our panel has the intelligence and the experience to talk pertinently, and also has the freedom to do so, because they are not in elected government office now, which is good for setting the context for the whole of this conference. And what I've asked the speakers to do really is to set context, to talk about the difficult economic context in which some of the political and security questions that we are sadly all too aware of are to be played out. Today, my colleagues are reading the official journal of the European Union and working out quite what the details of the sanctions imposed by the European Union are. And we know that we may know what they are on paper, but we don't know what their implications will be. We don't know what their consequences will be. We don't know what the retaliation might be. But that issue of sanctions plays into important economic contexts. So I've asked our speakers in a way to kick a lot of dust up into the air to set the context. They won't provide all the answers. There's a day and a half for answers to be provided. Without more ado, I think I'm going to, since you were last onto the stage, Mr. Gurría, we're going to let you speak first and set a model example of speaking for 5 minutes only. And I have a private bet with Mr. Piebalgs that you're incapable of doing that. Oh, it's not so private now. Anyway, but from your point of view, what do you see as the economic context that Europe is operating in and with which it's wrestling with all these political and security questions?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Dear friends, it's basically dealing with the legacies of the crisis. The crisis left at least 4 very heavy legacies. One is slow growth. One is high unemployment. The third is growing inequalities. And the fourth is a very serious destruction of confidence and trust. In what? Well, in everything we built over the last 100 years. In all the institutions, in presidents, prime ministers, ministers, political parties, parliaments, banks, multinationals, international organizations, everything. It's just, there's a total lot of trust, there's a lot of skepticism, there's a lot of cynicism, and that, of course, is because of the slow growth, because of the growing inequalities, because of the high unemployment, especially among the young, and new features like long unemployment, etc. So this is the context in where we're working. Now, what are the normal cylinders of the engine of growth? Trade, that has been sluggish. And we could not even finish the negotiation about Bali that we had somehow flagged as a success in last December. And now suddenly we go and try to put it together and it falls apart. And this was the easy part, frankly. The Doha round never got off the ground. Trade facilitation was the easy part. I call it the don't shoot yourself in the foot part. Because it was just common sense. Make it easy to import things so that you can export things, faster. And it didn't work. So another engine of growth, investment. It's not working, it's sluggish, it's half speed. Why? Because everybody is waiting for the decisions. Everybody is waiting to see. There's almost a cliche. A lot of money around, but no credit, because the banking sector has not been cured, has not been capitalized, has not been fully regulated, and because the banking union is not there, etc. And the question of confidence and trust, and people refraining and keeping their checkbooks, in their pockets and not putting out not more investment. And there's a third cylinder in the growth engine that had been driving us, and that's the growth of the developing countries. And China is holding. Brazil is very low. in growth. Countries like Mexico lost their dynamism. Countries like Turkey was growing at 8%, only just starting to kind of catch up again. And India is now looking better in the last quarter, but obviously lost the dynamism for some time. So the third cylinder of the engine, you know. And then I go back to the element, of course, of the confidence again. The confidence, the confidence, the confidence, the trust, the trust, the trust, which is permeating everything. And the other problem is it has impacts on the politics, it has on the governance, it has impacts on not just on the economics. And then you see a lot of changes in governments, etc. You can't explain. There's a malaise, as they would say in France. You know, there's something there that people are obviously resenting. So this is a big issue. And therefore, of course, what are our tools to get out of this? Our tools typically is bring down interest rates. You say, oh, didn't we do that already? Aren't interest rates at zero today, practically? Oh, well, maybe Draghi can do some QE or something like that, or he can do a little bit more. Everybody's asking more, nobody knows what. But we were there, we've been there, done that. You say, okay, let's spend our way out of this morass, this mediocre growth. You say, oh, wait. Didn't we do that already? Didn't we growth by 30 points of GDP, the average debt to GDP ratio? It's now close to 100. It was at 60. You remember Maastricht? It's at 60. Now we're close to 100 on average in the OECD. So that means no monetary policy tool, no fiscal tool. Then what do? Well, we say go structural. What does it mean? It's a slow way, but it's maybe the only way. Education, innovation, competition, flexibility in the labor market, flexibility in the product market, regulations, taxes, the health system, the financial system, research and development, universities, etc. These are, but Mr. Gurría, that's long term. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we got news for you. Long term is the short-term medicine. How do you bridge the short-term with the long-term effects and the time it's going to take to get out of this? By explaining to people. People are a lot more rational, a lot more intelligent than we believe. Let's give them the benefit of their own intelligence and explain to them that we are doing this because it's going to take some time, but it's going to get us out of the morass. Otherwise, we are looking at many years of mediocre growth, of undesirable growth, and therefore we're going to be sluggishly muddling through with not only growth, but the high unemployment, the growing inequality, and the loss of confidence, and the difficulty to run our societies.
Very good. It's not so very good because Mr. Piebalgs and I are going to have problems now on our wager, but very good time-wise. Excellent, and very good context. And I'm slightly worried that you've been developing a Twitter following if you're starting to say long-term is the short-term medicine. It's a kind of, it's made for Twitter. Very good. Mr. Gurría, now give that some. I should explain for those whose search engines aren't working or who haven't read the details of the book. There you are, twice a prime minister of Lithuania, now leader of the opposition. What's your practical experience of that hard way? I mean, some people would argue that one of the reasons you're in opposition is is that it was not possible to provide the medicine and remain elected. But Mr. Gurría has just said people are much more intelligent than we give them credit for. Is it so?
Well, good afternoon to everybody. It's really a pleasure again to be on this stage in the conference in this very nice building. My experience really is very clear. I was 2 times Prime Minister. On both occasions I was Prime Minister during the crisis. One the first time in 1999 to 2000, second time 2008, 2012. On both occasions after me being Prime Minister, Lithuanian economy started to recover, but we lost elections. So that's very simple. But first of all, my conclusions are very transparent and very precise. First of all, really, the crisis or the challenge is a very good time to push needed reforms and needed changes. Don't waste a good crisis for reforms. That's very simple. Second, actions, but not wars and not very long discussions, are resolving the crisis. So leadership is very much needed to go forward with the steps which are needed when you see either economical challenges or geopolitical challenges. So sometimes I think that in Europe we're spending too much of time discussing and not moving forward, especially during such period of time when we see all those geopolitical challenges around us. Also, I agree that you need to see both short time challenges and long time challenges. And long time challenges sometimes brings request of steps which are needed to be done now. When we're looking, okay, we had different experiences with different economical challenges during the last decade. We moved through, we overcame those problems. Our economies in the Baltic states are really in a good shape. My governmental ambition was fulfilled after we left the office, and ambition in our program was very simple. We in Lithuania, we need to become better than Estonians. That's very simple, in our region. And I was very happy that in 2013, when we were in opposition, GDP per capita numbers appeared to be really better in Lithuania than in Estonia. It's short-term, or let's say visions and ambitions. But of course, we understand in Europe very well that those numbers which Angela Merkel is using very often, what is the biggest challenge for Europe in a longer perspective, that Europe has only 7% of population, and Europe produces somewhere around of 20% of GDP, but Europe also has 50% of global social spending, that this is a long-term challenge which needs to have not only long-term visions how to resolve demography or things like that, but also short-term steps. And because my background long time ago was physics, I understand very simply that in order to improve the first 2 numbers, I mean numbers of population and total GDP, Europe needs not to be afraid of enlargement. Enlargement today, not tomorrow. If Europe wants to be really in the global leadership and not to fall into that trap that numbers are becoming more and more, those numbers are becoming bigger and bigger problem, Europe needs not to be afraid of enlargement. And that is why I think that what we see today is really a very, very big threat to the whole development in our region, Russian aggression in Ukraine. It requires from Europe real leadership, steps immediately, decisions immediately, which would bring a longer-term perspective much better than it is just now. Not only for Ukraine, but for the whole Europe. And one of the steps which really is very much needed, so very clear political will not to be afraid of a political declaration that Ukraine will be accepted as a member of EU. And I'm always dreaming that next Eastern Partnership Summit, which will be held in Riga, will definitely bring such a message next year. But besides that, of course, I think that we need to see other steps which are needed from that point of view, from how to resolve this political challenge of the global geopolitical crisis in Ukraine, of course sanctions and military assistance, but also having in mind that President Putin perhaps has a goal to create all the possible problems for Ukraine from economical point of view. We need to have a very clear vision how we can assist Ukraine from economical point of view. And I am going around and always and suggesting that we in the Baltics, we in Lithuania, we are getting really very big support from EU through structural funds, through cohesion funds for the next period, 2014-2020. We shall get somewhere out of 10 billion euros. Where the budget of EU will be somewhere out of 1,000 billion euros. And just to decide that 3% of that assistance should go to Ukraine would be really quick decision at the moment, which would resolve long-time problems of the whole region, which would create a special assistance instrument for Ukraine around of 30 billion euros, and that would be decisions which would be very much needed at the moment. But in conclusion, my again very simple answer to your question is our experience in the region is very simple. When there are challenges, economical or geopolitical challenges, there is very strong need for real political leadership. There is very strong need for action, not just a discussion. And I would like to see exactly that in Europe we should be able to go along those lines when we see all those challenges in our continent.
Thank you very much. You've been sufficiently provocative, I think, in your opening remarks, so that's fine. You've also given a link into Mr. Piebalgs, who is European Commissioner for Development. Part of his responsibility at the moment, although it will change for the next departmental situation, is that the staff in the Department for Development and Cooperation look after the neighbourhood policy instrument. Do you fight over that with the Commissioner for Enlargement, or does he get a free hand on that? How does it work? I'll let you answer that in a second, because of course that neighbourhood money that Mr. Kubilius was suggesting is the starting point really for financial assistance to Ukraine in many ways. And in Mr. Piebalgs' varied career, he's been the ambassador of Latvia to the EU, and then was working for Mrs. Cañete, and then was the Commissioner for Energy. And energy will play a small part in our discussions later on today. So he's sort of doubly qualified, also to pick up on from his current role as Commissioner for Development, to talk about that situation where is the economic growth going to come from elsewhere in the world. Mr. Piebalgs, have I set you enough hairs running?
Well, thank you, Tim. You really quite a lot of suggestions made particularly about this democratic legitimacy. I still start to think why everybody still accepts me talking to member states or parliaments. There should be some legitimacy. But okay, I think I would like to start with something very particular. If you see there, the sponsor is also European Commission representation in Latvia, and I'm very proud that it was done, because I see that the links between European Commission and NATO strengthening. President Barroso was first time ever invited also for NATO summit, and I think it is very good sign. I believe to answer about EU reaction in the crisis, because at the end of the day will come directly or indirectly impact on sanctions or relations with Russia on economic performance, I assume. I would say two very important things that I need to underline. First, that EU has today adopted sanctions, and it's not easy to agree. But the sanctions is very interesting. It's addressed financing sector, basically. And it's clearly avoid that some of the money stemming from the EU would support directly or indirectly military activity in Ukraine. So it's very correct level of sanction, I would say. And second, that all EU 28, it was a long time ago, agreed that Crimea is not part of Russia. It's part of Ukraine. So it's very clear that the EU has definitely demonstrated, in my opinion, very clear political stance, and I believe it is really remarkable when 28 different countries meet and discuss rather sensitive issues. Now about economic challenge, because Angel started to come to it, and there is a challenge, because the growth, what we have seen in the EU, will be weaker than we have had in spring forecast. So we have low growth, we have high unemployment, and very low inflation. So that all together gives us really reasons to worry. Is it lack of confidence? And here I would challenge Angel, because US is growing quite well. US is the difference in 2013 between us, and US is 2%. So it's quite significant. Why recovery in the EU is slower? Because we have had starting conditions different. I believe also some of the institutional issues that we have dealt, it is still need time to come to impact. And that leaves to me that in all this crisis situation, we need to focus on a couple of issues that still need to be done. First, it's definitely to continue reforms that started, particularly implementing banking union. It is a big thing on all the financial sector consolidation. Then we definitely need to strengthen also state aid competition policy, how it was reformed nowadays. We need to focus on innovation education, and definitely where Angel is right, social cohesion is an issue. So I believe that in all this political situation, we should be very much focused on things that need to be done in the EU to guarantee better growth and definitely better distribution of this growth. But I would like to close to the question that I believe each of us, we need to take clear stance. And it's about trade. Trade for EU is basically reason that we are the biggest trading bloc. We are working for 70% of our trade covered now by free trade agreement. But there is one agreement that stands out of it. It is Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And I know that there is two sides. One side is definitely it's the biggest free trade agreement that goes. And I believe, seeing how the economies function, definitely should be in favor. But there is a lot of people opposing to it, expecting that TTIP will change how our societies function. And I disagree with this. But I believe that it's very important that the governments take very clear stance towards TTIP, because if I see growth perspectives and trade perspective, investment perspective, definitely it's very much also related with TTIP. And that will be very clearly that we need to take political stance on that. So saying this, I would conclude, EU has really challenges to make. We know what needs to be done. It's important that governments follow this path. And I would like to thank Angel. OECD is always giving us good inspiration. They never forget to say what you need to be doing, and sometimes we are just too shy to implement things, because at the end of the day, it is responsibility towards the voters. And what Andris said, sometimes if you implement reforms, you lose the job.
And before we move on the development side of things, do you, I mean, Angel catalogued the problems with the BRICS at the moment. Do you see grounds for any optimism either elsewhere in the world, or do you dispute his reading of things?
Well, if I see how it is, I just take an example of South Africa. South African trade is very much related to us. South Africa can't rebound if there is not growth in the EU. If I see most of African countries, it's the same problem. Yeah. So EU health, of economic health, is crucial for global development. If we are sick, then the world is sick. It's still how Europe is functioning. So it's very clear impact. What we are trying to do at this stage with development money, mostly we are focusing on the ability of different regions definitely to produce better, to get better to the markets. That's investments in energy, investments in agriculture. Definitely governance is standing out of it. But if you would go to any port in Africa, and ports have increased, capacities nowadays also for handling. It's mostly imports. Exports are not coming out. So it is a demand that is staggering in the EU or in US that prevents also these economies to develop. So with development money, you can do a bit, and it's roughly 10 billion euro a year, but you can't create enough momentum to change the lives of the people in a sustainable way. What concerns Ukraine, what you ask is, well, definitely it's Stefan Füle that leads the neighborhood, but it's my service and I respond how the money is being spent. And for Ukraine, we mobilized all the money, we provided budget support in the situations that was most difficult, and we are out of the funds that we could provide to Ukraine during this year. So we spent all the money that we have had in our pocket. Definitely it was not just giving money. There are criteria built in that needs to be performed against good governance, but we did whatever was possible. But I believe that development aid is crucial to support countries in crisis, but in more sustainable, it depends how the trade and global economy is functioning.
Good, good, good. I should come now to Karl-Heinz Packe, forgive my ignorance, I don't know the population of Saxony-Anhalt. What is the population of Saxony?
It's 2.5 million.
It's like Latvia.
So, yes, I was about to make the comparison with Latvia, but I didn't know. Yes. And Saxony-Anhalt is a state that has been through some economic transition.
Yes.
It would be fair to say that Latvians could relate to. So that the what would have been the highest rate of unemployment in Saxony-Anhalt in the 1990s?
Well, in the early 1990s, it was above 20%. And if you count disguised unemployment, it would be roughly 30. Today, it's 10, roughly 10%. So,
okay, yeah. That's setting some context. Now, let me then come to you to give your read on this economic context.
yes, well, I won't talk about Saxony-Anhalt, ladies and gentlemen. I will talk, as an economist, round off a little bit the points that have been made, and with many of them I agree. I think it's important to take a kind of bird's eye view of Europe today. Europe is in a crisis, but it was in crisis and had challenges before. Think of the early 50s, the Reconstruction and the Cold War. Think of the early 70s, the oil crises, the collapse of the Bretton Woods system with all the adjustment that was coming up after that. Think of the early 1990s when the Iron Curtain fell and when all the reintegration of the East had to be done. And today, it's first of all the euro crisis and the debt crisis, and second, of course, the new imperialist stance of Russia. Now, what is different today, I think, is the psychology of the situation. The psychology is different because expectations had been so high. You know, economically, I remember well in the 1990s that we had a kind of naive belief in convergence. We thought that it takes a couple of years, a bit of investment, a bit of modernization, And then the East in Europe and Central Europe will catch up to the West. And the same thing with the South, with respect to the North. And that expectation has been badly frustrated. The same with the political side. You know, we thought we are living in a world of goodwill, of good political will, and Russia has proved that this is not the case. Now, the problem today is, of course, that we live in a globalized world, and we cannot turn back the clock of history. We cannot go back, as Russia does, into the imperial spirit of the 19th and 20th century, and we cannot go back within Europe in the pre-Euro time. I think that the political forces which are pulling into that direction, which have unfortunately gained quite a bit in the recent European elections in a couple of countries, think of the Front National, in France and in Germany of the Alternative für Deutschland. I think this is backward thinking. We have to proactively think about what we can put on track to get back on a growth and a catching up track. Well, I think I want to make 5 points, no more. There are more, but 5 absolutely central points. And you will find some of the points you have made before in the discussion in my list. First of all, we have to staunchly defend and stabilize the euro. I think this needs more macroeconomic policy coordination. This needs more of a banking union. We haven't created the institutions that a country like America has for a long time to get out of this growth slack. Now, no wonder the Americans are much faster in the recovery. They have a banking unit for a long time. They recapitalized their banks immediately. And they are on the growth track again. Same with Britain, by the way. And this is not because Europe cannot do it, but just because Europe did not want to do it so far. And unfortunately, my country, in my view, was one of the most dragging its feet in a notorious way for a long time. I think we are improving right now. And I think that with the Draghi policy and the general attitude towards macroeconomic stabilization, we are coming closer to a solution, but we are still not there. With respect to the euro, I think, I would go even a step further. We need a perspective of other countries joining the Eurozone, notably Poland would be extremely important in Central and Eastern to really enlarge the Eurozone with new institutions and get back into the growth track. Second,
yeah, you're going to have to accelerate. If you've got 5,
I'm going to accelerate. The second point, I can be very brief on that, is TTIP. We need TTIP as a growth impulse. We need it for giving a shining example worldwide of a fair trading a system with fair trading standards, which will be relevant for further liberalization in the world. We finally need it as an important transatlantic initiative at times when the transatlantic relations are not easy. Third, that was mentioned also, we need a supply-side European growth policy which does not only focus on traditional infrastructure-style investment, but on knowledge creation, on technology, on education, and on vocational training. Because those countries which have got better out of the crisis are typically those who have good educational system and good systems and good vocational training systems. Let me finally say, point 4, we need, of course, a defense of international law. I think this is why we need a cooperative but tough stance vis-à-vis the return of Russia to imperialist policies. And finally, we need a much stronger cooperation in defense policy and defense procurement in Europe. A lot of money is simply wasted because we do not have yet a cooperation, a division of labor as we have it in many commercial fields in the military procurement area. There are two areas basically where the options, the opportunities of the division of labor have not been grasped yet. This is energy, this is the one side, and the second is defense. Now, if we really decisively tackle these issues in the short and medium run, we will be get back on the right track, but of course the problems are long-term problems. We have to be patient as well. These problems we have now will not solve in 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. They are problems which will accompany us over the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question, Mr. Gurría. You nodded about, or you appear to be nodding about TTIP. Mr. Piebalgs' view on TTIP was that governments had to take a clear stance on it. And what came into my head as he said governments have to take a clear stance, as I understood it, in favour of TTIP and the benefits it draws, was that you had already outlined how basically governments have a credibility problem. So my question would be, okay, governments could take a clear stance on things, but is the public at large going to believe them in a world that, as you've outlined things, everyone is distrusting, sceptical, not even trusting each other, and much less their governments?
The difference here is you sign or you don't sign. You commit or you don't commit. Why did it fall through in the follow-up to Bali? Because it was close to the end, and then India balked because they did not want to. And Washington would not accept the India position about food security. India did not want to compromise the position. It fell through. For the second time between India and the United States, by the way, because the first time, when we almost had Doha, it was also because of agriculture and also because of the United States and India. Now, the agricultural sector is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking in our economies. The services sector is expanding. The manufacturing sector is expanding. It's the agricultural sector that has twice, sunk the promise of a better trade deal. Of course, I'm saying go for it. Of course, I'm saying because we can't do a multilateral. Then let's do regional. This is our choice. It's not the best choice. It's the only choice. But it's big. It's big. Already, Europe is the largest trading bloc. Already, the United States, second largest trading bloc. The two together will be 50% of the world's GDP. 30% of the world trade, 20% of the world's investment flows, whatever. It's just huge. So, but there's also TPP being negotiated. Go for it. There's the Alliance for the Pacific in the Americas, between the coalition, the willing, if you will, Mexico and Chile and Colombia and Costa Rica and Peru. What do they have in common? They all have, best practices. They all share the same principles of governance and government, etc., the same goals. They're going for it. So I'd say this is second best. It's the only best, because the first best is not there. And I think if you fill that gap and the other cylinder that I suggested that is not working fast, actually it's working very bad in the case of Europe, which is credit. Credit, because as was mentioned here, the banking union has to get finished. The capitalization process of the banks has to get finished. The asset quality review by the ECB has to get finished. The stress tests have to get finished. And last but not least, of course, the one very, very invaluable service that the ECB has provided, many others, but one is the question of funding the banks at a time when the interbank system went dry, and now funding the banks medium and long term at low rates so that they can lend money, which is something the banks have not been doing. They've been too worried surviving and not going bankrupt, but they forgot that they also have to lend money, otherwise the economy doesn't work. So that engine also has to be done. So get credit back, get trade back, even if it's not an ideal formulation, because if it's not multilateral, it's regional, and get investment back, and we'll be back on track.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the panel in a bit, but let me invite questions from the audience. I'm not sure of what the microphones. There's a roving mic on the aisle there, and is there another one over there? Yes, good. So if you want to identify yourself, that might help, especially people outside the room. Carry on.
Sergei Utkin, Russian Academy of Sciences Center for Situation Analysis. I have a question to Mr. Secretary General of the OECD. We had a prospect of accession of Russia to the organization before the Ukrainian crisis. Now it's stopped. And as I can imagine, in the next following years, we cannot expect any substantial communication with the Russian government in the framework of your organization. But people speculate about possibilities to find alternative ways to communicate with the Russian business community, for example, with the Russian society. So do you see ways to communicate with the academia, with the Russian business society that could be used even in the situation when the government is not really a possible partner for your work?
Okay, I'm going to group some questions, and I'll add one from Twitter on that, which you can pencil in as well, which is, I don't know whether it goes with that question you've just asked, but it was, why does the OECD need Latvia to join it? I'll let you decide whether it goes with that question on. There was another question up there.
Thank you. Hamid Lajvardi, American Baltic Investments. Mr. Gurría, you talked about all the reasons for the Great Recession. You gave 4 reasons. I want to concentrate on the one about destruction of confidence and trust. As we know, it takes a long time to build and it can be shattered overnight. In terms of tools, you talked about, in particular, about regulation. That's where I want to concentrate. Let's go to the causes of the Great Recession. I think most people would agree one of the greatest causes was the high degree of greed in the financial sector. It was obvious to a lot of people in the financial sector that something is going to happen. So please tell us, do you have any sense of optimism that this essential part of the Great Recession, namely greed in the financial sector, has been addressed, that down the line, another 5, 10, 15 years, it will not happen again?
Now I need a question from what's my right-hand side, your left-hand side of the room, just to even things up, please. And because otherwise the person holding the microphone will fall asleep. So I need a question on that side of the room, please. Yes? In that case, she's going to move over to the other side of the room, and nobody else will ever get any chance on that side to ask any questions. Or they could just swap. They could do a timeshare. You sure? Carry on.
March of this year, the members of the Council of the OECD decided to postpone, for the time being, that's the way the decision reads, all activities related to the accession of Russia. They also decided that should the Russians decide to continue with the technical and expert work on committees, subcommittees, working groups, task forces, etc., of which they already belong, like Latvia does, but they belong to an even larger number of our installed decision and technical making capacities on sectors specific, that they would, and that we would continue. So we do. We don't need to find different ways. The decision stands today. It may or may not be modified by Council, but the decision stands today that we have this. We stopped negotiating accession, but we continued to work on the technical and experts issues and exchanges. They continue to attend these committees, these working groups, etc. And of course, we do work with academia, we do work with the private sector, but that's another matter. They go to B20, they go to BIAC, they go to other issues, and of course the G20 and other bodies continue to be at ministerial level because they're members and they continue to attend, at least so far. Okay, now, so that takes care of that. Why do we need Latvia? I believe that we have a lot to learn from Latvia. Latvia is one of the countries that had one of the most dramatic impacts of the crisis. It practically suffered a meltdown. Over the years, it had contracted almost 1/4 of its GDP, and it's back on its feet, and it's going strong. And just for resilience, big capital R, we'd have to find the potion, whatever they rub on their face or whatever they do, that we can borrow and that we can, imitate. Second, the discipline. Third, the capacity to find consensus in order to take hard decisions. Because today, it's not that we don't know what we have to do. It's that it can't get done because of the political forces, because of political fragmentation, because you have weak coalitions everywhere, and because the question of the leadership hasn't been there. And therefore, we haven't done the things we have to do, even if we know it's not rocket science. We're talking about economics, and we're talking about adding and subtracting, and we're talking about what will add up. But we're not doing it, again, because of the politics and because of the fragmentation and the weak leadership. So we can borrow that from Latvia. If only we can borrow that, that'd be fantastic. You know, we can export it. We can sell it in little bottles or perfumes with an atomizer, whatever. I don't know. But there are also practical issues that have to do with productivity, with competitiveness. They have to do, because Latvia is an excellent example that is also perceived and being seen by other countries, not just OECD countries. And through the OECD, we service and serve and support other countries where the example of Latvia may be relevant more than the example of the United States, or the example of Italy, or the example of Turkey. Smaller countries. Most of the countries in the world, the 200 million, the 200 countries in the world are small. They're not the United States. They're not Russia or China or India. They are smaller countries. And those may find the Latvian example more relevant, more specific. And the OECD can be a magnifier, a loudspeaker. But plus the fact that we can, when we get all the policymakers of Latvia around the table, they will become part of the design team, of the architects of the new standards for the whole of the world. Not only to practice them, hopefully, but also to design them for everybody else to do that. So,
and on the question of whether or not the banking community has given up greed for good.
Oh, that's the third one. That's the third one. I was going in order of appearance. Regulation, okay. You never give up greed. That's part of the system. It's part of human nature.
Yes.
The question is, how do you control the worst effects of greed? How do you regulate in order to avoid that the system suffers the worst effects of greed and of human nature? But it is an intuition. It is a mechanical force that drives people to do things. And if well channeled, it can be, of course, a driving force for the good. Regulations were too lax. Non-regulation, or the absence of regulation, the flexible regulation, the rule regulation, marshmallow regulation become the rule. And not only did we not regulate, we were so proud that we did not regulate. So look at the creativity. Look at the ingenuity of our financial sector. Look at all the wonderful things they're doing, and that was the mess that blew up in our faces. And of course, it blew out in our faces in the United States, And in Europe, they were saying, that's an American problem.
Yes, exactly.
Then they moved to the UK. Exactly. By the time they were saying it's an American problem, people started lining outside Northern Rock and asking for their money, you know. So they said, oh, well, it's an Anglo-Saxon problem. And of course, by the time they finished saying Anglo-Saxon, which is a very long and complicated word, they got up to here, you know, in France and in the Netherlands and in Germany and everywhere else. So there is a question of getting back to some of the fundamentals. There has to be better regulation. And one of the things is Dodd-Frank, Volcker, Vickers, Liikanen, the separation between commercial banking and investment banking. You cannot have a mixed model where you're using insured by who? By the public. Insured deposits of the general public being invested in high stakes and high risk investment business rather than lending it to mortgages or lending it to small and medium enterprises, which is banking do. If you mix commercial banking and investment banking, you have a mess. And that's exactly what happened. We know the lesson, so let's keep it apart going forward. But you can't do away with greed. You just have to harness it.
Well, I don't want to take the shine off the applause, but I wanted to invite Mr. Piebalgs to take a guess at what it is that might be bottled. Somebody on Twitter is simply making the point that actually what you might be bottling is mass emigration. That actually what Latvia went through was a mass movement of people out of the country, and instead of devaluation or whatever. What's your guess as to what might be bottled?
Well, I think one of the basic difference with the United States is that our labor market is very national in character. At the same time, we have free movements of goods, services, capital. And I think it's quite normal that the labor in the EU tries to work in the places where there is more demand for their skills. Definitely demands a couple of issues to be solved. One is language issue. That definitely is something that is preventing. Second, I believe that closer cooperation between the education systems would be very, very helpful. Just for example, in vocational training, I just take Latvia's example. Vocational training is very expensive. It's very expensive. And what are employers in Latvia? Well, it's a lot of employers that are coming outside. So it is need to be adjusted for broader EU market. So for me, it is evidence that we need European labor force that are enough responding for the demand from labor market. Without it, we will continue to stay with high level of unemployment. And I believe that is a real challenge. It's challenge economical, but it's also psychological, social challenge. And I believe that promoting labor mobility is the right thing to do.
Well, I might add, you said devaluation and migration, you know, as an alternative. I think that you can, by devaluing your currency, you can buy a little bit of time, but not more. Yeah. You know, the deeper problem has just been described. The deeper problem is whether and to what extent you have a workforce which has access to a decent vocational training and which then can bring in the potential, the supply potential, which a catching up country needs. And of course, there lies, I think, a fundamental problem of Europe in the years to come. Please don't forget that a country like Germany, or also Switzerland, Austria, and all the rest of the industrial core countries, go through a dramatic demographic change. A very large number of the baby boomer generation will get retired in the next 10, 15, 20 years. These are all these excellently educated, highly skilled engineers that are the backbone of our technological competitiveness. Now, if we stay with the huge difference in Europe in terms of wages and productivity that we still have today, then we will have really a mass movement of young, educated people from the periphery countries to the industrial core. Well, I'm not against migration. Migration is, of course, an absolutely natural thing, but we should not, in the long run at least, we should not go over the top, because if a country bleeds out in terms of human capital, it's very hard to get the people back. And that's exactly the challenge we have right now between the North and the South, and still the West and the East in Europe.
And Mr. Kubilius, how does that play with Ukraine? I mean, what happens if you get basically mass emigration of young, educated people from Ukraine?
Well, first of all, our experience. 25 years ago, we were fighting for freedom, including freedom of movement, which was not the case in the Soviet Union.
Right.
We remember everybody what was the life then. So we got freedom, including freedom of movement. During the last 10 years, being members of EU, we celebrated this year such a nice anniversary. So we looked into the numbers. So 10 years ago, we had our GDP per capita average, if to compare with the average EU, numbers was only 40%. Now it's 70%. And as I said, we became better than Estonians even, which is the biggest achievement. So, but if to look further away, how things are improving. So what we see just now, of course, during the crisis, during the recession, when you have recession minus 15%, or like in Latvia, they had minus 18% back in 2009. So it's obvious that people are leaving the country where unemployment became 18%. But recently, when we are looking into statistics, we see that numbers of re-emigration are improving very rapidly. So the difference in between of emigration and re-emigration is diminishing. And we see a lot of young professionals who graduated somewhere in Great Britain or somewhere else, who got professional experience. They are coming back with a knowledge which for us is of a very great value. So that is a normal development. Yes, and Ukraine will move along the same trajectory. Of course, they will suffer big emigration. In Europe, perhaps somebody will become afraid of that. But at the end, after some time, Ukraine will benefit very heavily because people will start to come back. And that is how things are happening all the time in such a situation. For us, just now, for example, we are looking exactly towards Eastern neighborhood countries, how to attract young, skilled professionals, because in some areas of our economy, we have a shortage of labor force, because labor force left for Sweden or Great Britain or Germany. So that is very normal. I don't see here any kind of very big problem.
Well, but that presumes that the case of Latvia and Estonia was, of course, that there was a temporary crisis, which was courageously solved. The problem is when you have a country stuck in a situation which gives a very bad long-term perspective where young, talented people don't see a future. Then they really leave for good. I think it very much depends on the policy, whether the country does its homework or is allowed to do its homework.
Let me just say something. We have to do better about migration. We are aging societies.
Yes.
And we need to be able to have good migration policies. They are the only shot we have at continuing to grow, at continuing to increase productivity. Otherwise, what we're going to have is a higher and higher dependency ratio. Fewer and fewer people are going to be working in order to sustain a larger and larger army of retired people. And we're going to have a lot more tension in terms of the public finances. It also produces much more expensive healthcare systems because aging produces recurrent expenditure and the type of care that you have to provide. So it's like a pincer movement. It hurts on both sides. So, and what is the solution? Well, after you have prolonged the life of working, because if you live longer, you should work longer. If you get every woman on board, and every young man on board, and that means skills. The employability depends on what kind of skills you have. It's not just that you have two hands, you have to know what to do with them. Today, we have a lot of unemployed people who are not employable because they don't have the skills that the market is requiring. But even if you had all of them on board, eventually it's going to catch up with you. You're going to need to deal with the question of migration, not because as an alternative to devaluation, but it's simply because it's a natural way to complement it. The EU has this mobility. They still have not mastered some of the tricks, but with the rest of the world, I can tell you, countries like Japan, countries like Korea, etc., who are the oldest societies and aging very fast, and they have a very, very conservative migration policy. Well, unfortunately, they are going to need a better one because it's, one of the only ways in which they're going to be able to have a future.
Good news. There's a question from that side of the room. Excellent. And now we'll find there's no battery in the microphone. No, go on.
Yeah, honored. My name is Matt Bryza. I'm the director of the International Center for Defense Studies in Tallinn. I'm glad to hear that the competition between Estonia and Lithuania has done such good things. And drawing on Secretary General Gurría's initial remark about how the long term is best medicine for the short term perhaps now, and then thinking about Russia and this escalating potential sanctions war or trade war and how that may weigh down economic growth in Europe even further, I'd like to try to turn the table a little bit. In the long term, had Europe done even more of what then Energy Commissioner Piebalgs was advocating in terms of diversification of energy supplies, the equation would look different now. And in fact, then Prime Minister Kubilius did something dramatic, right? I mean, he moved Lithuania faster than any other country in unbundling the various aspects and therefore demonopolizing Lithuania's energy system, especially with regard to developing a liquid natural gas terminal, which wasn't the most popular thing in a lot of Europe. People said, oh, well, is that economic? But if you look at energy prices today, the spot market price of liquid natural gas is about 22% less than the average price of Russian pipe gas into Europe. So if everybody had all these access to liquid natural gas, Europe would save a lot of money. And in fact can at this very moment. If you take the gas that's in storage now in the EU, 85 BCM, look at the overall total of gas that was imported last year from Russia, 163 BCM, that leaves 78 billion cubic meters. Demand remains the same this year as last year. There's enough LNG capacity available, unused, right, to import that 78 BCM. And if Europe did that right now, you'd save about $5 billion. So that's a pretty dramatic development. Now, it's because interconnections haven't come into place, it's difficult to move the gas around. But I just want to, sorry for belaboring this, but how do these sorts of factors now factor into decision-making throughout Europe? I mean, looking at these long-term planning mechanisms with short-term steps that can be taken may not be popular in the business community because the businesses want to reach their own deals, but need everybody to come together. I know it's difficult to achieve. How are we doing on that? Thank you.
Okay, that side of the room has really redressed the balance now, hasn't it? Mr. Piebalgs, you start off on that one. I know we're rolling back some years since you were Commissioner for Energy, but...
Well, I think the fundamentals are the same, and I think one is why it was not done what should have been done is long-term agreements. That is a challenge that DG Competition is looking in, because that's basically you have political imperative, but as you believe in market economics, nothing happens in the market. Politicians speak one thing, and market does another thing. So that is what is looking, DG Competition is looking. Second, it is definitely interconnections that are being now strengthened. There is additional money for energy interconnections, and that definitely will help to unblock capacities, because what I have seen, whenever you have a common project on the border, then the countries involved never can agree who will pay. That makes such a big difficulty, and that is one particular challenge is inside the EU, because intergovernmental cooperation sometimes is too difficult really to find solution for rather simple problems. And if it is some European money available, it usually smoothes up the processes. Third, it is a strengthening of internal market regulation, because internal market still is very much fragmented. And that's, I think, what is the new Commission will continue to do. We have even Vice President for energy community. So it's something, sorry?
Energy union.
Energy union, it's even stronger. So I hope in the next 5 years, on the basis what Commissioner Oettinger has been done, I think it will evolve. But most important, definitely, is what doing DG competition, because that's where the real challenge is. Market is closed, and capacities that are even available are not being used. And that, I think, is competition issue that need to be addressed.
Mr. Gurría?
Yeah, I would like to say, first of all, that exactly what we did in energy sector during 2008, 2012, what Ambassador Brisa mentioned, is showing how important is both EU leadership on some issues and national leadership. And here I would praise Commissioner Piebalgs, because back in 2007, 2008, when he was still Commissioner on energy, he pushed the major reforms in gas sector, unbundling directives, set package, and so on and so on. And Lithuania, luckily, we decided it was some kind of intuition. You know, we still have been dependent 100% on Russian gas supply. Nothing was changing, nothing was happening, and we decided that we should go simply because of intuition that maybe Russia can become a bigger problem. We decided that we shall go for most radical implementation of the directive. And when we made such a political decision based on intuition, we understood very quickly that Gazprom will not be very happy, and we need to develop in parallel our LNG facility. Because if Gazprom will not be very happy, so we shall be punished with the deliveries through this single pipeline. Exactly that happened. Gazprom, when we started to implement our European directive, blaming Brussels, in our discussions with Gazprom, Gazprom decided to punish us. They increased for us the price for gas by 20%. We appealed to Stockholm arbitration, to Commission, and so on and so on. But we also, in parallel, we were doing two things. We were reforming, according to European directive, our gas sector, and also we were building a terminal. And because terminal will be operational from December this year, back in June, Gazprom decided to cut prices which they are delivering for us by 20%. So that's the result of action, let's say, and leadership both of EU and some kind of small leadership in our country.
Competition and markets is called.
Big leadership.
Yeah, yeah. End of monopoly.
Good. I'll turn to this side of the room now to see if they're going to retaliate. I'm also looking at messages coming in on the Twitter side. I want Commissioner Gurría, Commissioner, I've given you your next job has arrived already.
Become European now.
Yeah.
You have lived long in Paris, so...
Anything's possible. No, not that possible. The OECD published a country report on Spain.
Last week.
Yes. And I wondered going back to your issue about the long-term medicine, but also migration and the difficult issue of talking about migration to resident populations that have high unemployment, particularly amongst the young. I wondered what lessons about transition and recovery there might be that you see from that most recent report.
Well, the lesson is that reform works. You got to give it time. And the one problem I have with Spanish reforms is that it started late. Because they were one of the ones who said that's an American problem, that's an Anglo-Saxon problem. Even when it got to the shores of continental Europe, they still thought they had it right and they were not going to get the virus. So when they got the virus, they were in a political transition, and then Mr. Zapatero started to take some measures. Then there was a change of government. Then Mr. Rajoy started taking some decisions now in earnest. Now, and it needed time. The first time I went to see Mr. Rajoy a few days after he took office,
they asked me right point blank, I said, do you think that Spain needs a little bit more time for their adjustment program so that they can get to the deficits? And I said, yes, absolutely. They're taking all the fundamental decisions, et cetera, but they need a little bit more leeway in terms of the fiscal. Now, you can only do that once or twice. You can't do it too often. But the point is here. What is happening in Spain? They had a current account of 10% of GDP deficit. They now have a current account surplus of 1%.
Yes.
They had a deficit of 10 or 11%. They're now around the 4, coming down, you know, and they're on schedule. They're on track. They did not ask for additional. They had a leaky banking system. They asked for 100 billion. They spent 40 billion of that. They have the other 60 there to do something with it or give it back, whatever. And they now have a reasonably well capitalized, reasonably well, and they're going to be a part, of course, part of the regulated and the supervised ECB, too big to fail, banking union, etc. So they got that right. But what has been the most, trade. They used to have a huge deficit that's part of the current account. Now they have a surplus with the European Union of all places, you know, exactly. Not only with the. So what about what Spain has become, you know, unfortunately known for, which is the unemployment? Well, unemployment went up to close to 27%, started tapering off, and now slowly is coming down. Now it's in the 24% or something like that. And they had the best month of August in 10 years, so good indicators. Why? Because they started making tough adjustments. More flexibility in the labor market. I said that as part of the structural. More flexibility in the product market. And what had happened in Spain? Together with France, Italy, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, Spain, Germany. Okay, what am I talking about? Salaries against productivity. In all these countries, salaries had risen for 15 years. It was not a year, it was not 2, it was not the year before the crisis. 15 years of accumulating salary increases that went beyond productivity. Germany accumulated 15 years of increasing salaries lower than productivity. What happened over 15 years? A gap of about 30%. We call that gap das Krokodil. But Spain is now closing the jaws.
Slowly.
Actually, not so slowly.
Not so slowly.
Greece, more precipitously and abruptly, has already done that, but Spain coming down the hard way. More flexibility in the labor market, you know, a lot of job destruction, yes, but a lot of rejuvenation of new companies, more knowledge-based, less, you know, they're moving from the brick to the neuron, you know, to the brain cell. That is a very difficult transition to do because they were based on the construction business. Now they got to go for the more knowledge base. But what is happening there? Well, what is happening in Spain as they moved from the brick to the neuron and what is that they're changing the productive model in Spain, and they have brought down not only real, sometimes nominal wages, very, very tough and very painful. And hopefully they will fill the remaining gap with productivity. We're not saying you have to bring down wages all the way to meet the Germans. The Germans are helping by pushing a little bit up, minimum wage and all that. But the difference has to be filled with productivity. Productivity is the only way in which you're going to be able to improve wages. Otherwise, you're condemned to continue to lose wages in real and nominal terms. So go for the productivity, go for these medium and long-term issues in order to be able to continue to raise wages and to get market share.
we're teetering on the edge of our timing. And I'll get a quick comment from you, and then I'm going to come back with a question for all the panel, which you're going to have to answer.
Just a note on the crocodile.
Yeah.
You were absolutely correctly describing the situation in the crisis countries. In Germany, in turn, wages are picking up. Not just due to the minimum
they're
wages,
helping this, yes.
but in general we have an upward trend of wages.
Yep.
So what we see is an adjustment internationally within the Eurozone, which works. It takes a lot of time. It is extremely painful because the mouth of the crocodile was so wide open before.
Yep.
But it works. I'm sometimes wondering about the general reception in the public that nothing happens. A huge amount of adjustment has happened in recent years, and Germany is moving to full employment. We get quite substantial wage increases in the years to come, and all these disequilibria will gradually disappear.
Quick question, and I want a quick answer, which is, to what extent do you think that some of the economic problems that Europe has dealt with, will Europe be able to get beyond them to shape events in the rest of the world, or is it subject to suffering according to what happens elsewhere?
Well, the world is not a zero-sum game or a negative-sum game, but Europe has to find its proper place in the new division of labor in the future in the world. And that place is, of course, not the bricks, but the brain.
Okay, that's your answer, Mr. Piebalgs?
Yes. Well, as usual, I'm quite optimistic about, but there is a challenge because what I see in what's happening on real grounds gives, well, a lot of optimism. What you see in rhetorics of political discussion, it definitely gives a lot of things for worry. And I think this disequilibrium between the real work on ground level and political discussions makes me worry, because sooner or later there is particular challenge. And there is one particular challenge that we now see from the Russian response, because a lot of member countries says, well, we are ready with sanctions, but then the burden should be equally distributed between the countries. Well, we have common market. That's affect common market, and it can't be, the thinking is, in my opinion, is false.
Okay, Mr. Kubilius?
Well, I'm optimist when I'm speaking about the future of Europe. First of all, simply because in such a way I understand the history of Europe. Union was moving from one crisis to another crisis, and from each crisis Europe was coming out with some new big ideas, becoming more consolidated, moving forward, and so on and so on. So when we see challenges in Europe, we need to look what new big ideas will come out. So from that point of view, I think that further consolidation, even political consolidation of Europe, that is our destiny. Further political consolidation will bring more effective leadership in Europe, and that will make Europe more effective in its actions, not only in discussions. I think, as I said before, we ran out of room on the monetary policy side. We ran out of room on the fiscal policy side. So I think go for structural change, get investment, get credit, get trade back alive, full engine, full cylinders working instead of at half speed, and also get some of the qualitative elements on the books and on the policies. There are today 12 million more unemployed than before the crisis. We got to take care of those. We got to make them employable again. We got to get on the policy specific training, retraining, skilling, reskilling, upskilling in order to make them reinsertable in the market. We have women, we have children, we have elderly, we have migrants we got to take care. So go structural, go social, and last but not least, go green.
Go green.
Go green.
Right.
Green.
Now, part of the freedom of the of the first session is that it doesn't have to answer all the questions, but it also imposes an obligation on me to wrap things up on time so that you can get to a coffee break. I'd like, on your behalf, to thank the panel. Thank you for their contribution.